Hello, ohayo gozaimasu. Konnichiwa, and welcome to another review of another Kawashima Yuzo film. This, I think, his penultimate film, made just a year or so before he sadly passed away, rather too early. The Temple of the Wild Geese. This is a film that throws several of Kawashima's stylistic and, we may say, authorial signatures and sensibilities into stark relief. Like the other films that I've mentioned and reviewed elsewhere, both on my YouTube channel and on my website, this is a film that's set in and around a single location, a very insular space. The temple of the title. It's a temple that is named after a significant painting that adorns its interior, one that in an opening scene is extolled for its artistic value, its beauty, and certain philosophical connotations. Thereafter, it's a space of tension, a space of hierarchical discipline and stringent action and routine, and it's a space of materialistic pleasure, bodily pleasure, eating, and indeed, typically for Kawashima, sexuality. Now, the former, the sense of stringent regulation, routine, almost cruel hierarchical structure, is personified by the chief abbot and a young, as it were, trainee monk, a protege, who is summarily put through tortuous physical paces, trying to clean the space, trying to prepare food, trying to undertake the typical, as it were, ablutions of being a monk, and being treated indifferently at best, at worst, as I said, cruelly, with neglect, with a strict emphasis on accounting for just about every minute of his day, which, along with his enforced military training, which takes place in a nearby army cadet corps, leaves him frustrated, exhausted, and in several scenes scampering underneath the temple like a sort of frightened or cowed animal, in order for a little bit of personal time and respite from the sort of punishments and the rigors that are meted out above. He's someone who has been, as it were, almost sold into the role of trainee monk. There's a brief flashback in which his backstory is filled in, where he is sort of sent on his way from his poor rural family. His father he doesn't know, and his mother is struggling with him and other children, with his siblings, and she sends him away, largely, we are told, because that would be one less mouth to feed for her. And this sense of not knowing who his family is, this is something that happened when he was quite young, and he comes to reflect on a lack of a stable identity, and this is fed by increasing resentment, increasing frustration, and increasing anxiety over what he is forced to do as part of his day-to-day life in the temple. The former, the sense of sort of bodily or materialistic pleasure, comes from another, as it were, inductee into the temple grounds and temple space. That is the mistress of the abbot, someone who, like the young monk or trainee monk, has also been obliged to leave home in search of a living, who only has, to all intents and purposes, a single mom, albeit one who she has sporadic contact with. And she, in essence, prostitutes herself for bed and board in the space. So as well as a space of aesthetic and ascetic refinement, this is also a sort of brothel of sorts, and a site of, as I said, increasingly strict, stringent sort of physical labour, a working space. And Kawashima typically dovetails these stories, this sort of triangular relationship, and builds up to almost a murder mystery taking place and taking precedence. But I won't go too much into that. I'll save you to sort of discover this narrative, as it were, almost volte-face for yourself. So there is a very prevalent tension that animates this film, both its narrative and its thematic heart, we could say, in a space of philosophical reflection, of devoting oneself to a purity of the mind. It is a kind of guttural emphasis on the corporeal, on the body, that predominates. And within this, as I've said, there is sort of bodily excess. There is, on the one hand, sensuality, an excess of sensuality, albeit this is entirely on the abbot's part. And on the other, an excess of bodily sort of pain, if you like, bodily rigour, bodily torture. The young novice monk is tied literally to this space. The abbot takes to tying a rope around him so that he can literally sort of control his movements, can wake him up, for instance, if he's not up at supposedly the right time in the night, 3 a.m, to continue his ablutions, to continue his learning, to offer chants, to offer prayers. And this is a sort of lofty ideal that, instead of purifying and developing the novice's mind, only leads to the sort of breaking down of his body. It's no coincidence or accident that the first time we see this young monk, he is emptying the toilet. He's literally picking up and carrying around excrement through the temple grounds. So he's forever linked with the sort of baseness, if you like, of the human body, and almost nowhere with the loftier ideals of his, work, his what you generally think of as a calling, with entering a temple, but which is here much like a ritual or summary punishment. So we've got this very stark gap, this chasm, if you like, between the mental, the philosophical, the religious, the high and the ideal, with the very base routines, rituals, demands of the body. I think this is one of the films that would most have animated and intrigued Imamura Shohei, who, as I said in my review of Elegant Beast, was an acolyte himself of Kawashima Yuzo, who looked up to him as a cinematic mentor. And this sense of a kind of gutter point of view on a very rarefied, very circumscribed milieu is something that is incredibly prevalent throughout this film. The young mistress, to all intents and purposes, prostituting herself, is played by Wakao Ayako, in a much different role, but one which overlaps distinctly in terms of the use of sexuality on her part, with her role in Elegant Beast. There, as I said, all the different characters and stories sort of tumble into each other in this film and culminate not just in the aforesaid potential, at least, murder mystery, although that's probably over-egging the pudding to describe it as such. There's also a correlative to the tensions and antinomies that I've already noted, and that is between life and death, when the young monk is called upon after the disappearance of the abbot to sort out some of the practicalities to do with a funeral for someone who lives nearby. And this Kawashima takes great pains to depict. And importantly, he doesn't lampoon it as such. There are certain aspects of this religious undertaking, of the protocol involved therein, that he pokes fun at, much as Itami Juzo would do in very similar scenes in his 1984 debut film, The Funeral. There's a moment here when the coffin proves too heavy for those tasked with carrying it, and they all begin to stumble and fall around. And there is also a kind of exaggerated performance by the priest called on to lead the sort of funerary recitations that verges on the comedic. But there is also a kind of more or less straight-faced respect for the solemnity of this occasion, and for the young priest's ability to sort of immerse himself in the not just the spiritual sort of imperatives of this undertaking, but also the bodily practicalities of extended sutras, of leading processions, of organizing where the coffin is to go, on overseeing or at least looking out for how it is being dealt with in terms of the burial and what have you. And this becomes kind of like an extended set piece towards the end of the film. And it really is an incredible sequence. One that goes by for long stretches without dialogue, and one in which Kawashima's visually sort of connotative filmmaking mixes close up and long shot, extreme low angle and high angle shots, as he does throughout in depicting the temple as a kind of fragmented space as it is. The visual storytelling is really superbly detailed and meaningful here, without at all seeming sort of ostentatious or overly arty, and the tone is really beautifully controlled and developed throughout this scene. So this really is a fascinating and a really apt reflective and representative way for Kawashima to sort of almost round out his career. One more aspect of the film that I think is very Kawashima, but importantly for a director whose style was so ingrained, which never feels sort of self-conscious, is the way that he contrasts two different time periods. Again, this is a film built on contrast, as I've been saying. Stylistically, he adumbrates this with a move in the final scene from black and white, which the whole film is in, except for the credit sequence at the beginning, to bright, garish colour, something like Technicolor, and with from a kind of controlled, very often static sense of precise composition to a sort of almost chaotic handheld cinematography. And we jump forward in time to, we infer the present day. There's talk of this being post-World War II. We can infer, although we're never told, that the main body of the film is somewhere in the 1930s. So we jump forward 25, maybe 30 years for a coda in which the temple has become bastardized as a kind of space of commodification. We see a gaggle of Western tourists being reprimanded for gathering in the temple space and trying to take pictures, and being directed instead to a sort of souvenir store selling postcards. And I think, given that this also features, this scene, a treatise on the painting of the wild geese, the film kind of leaves us with a sense of the duality of the artwork that is represented by the title. Whilst the image of the wild geese is something that two different abbots in the temple extol the virtues of, the artistic and aesthetic merits of, and indeed that tourists hungrily gobble up at the end, for the young novice, the image of the wild geese is something that probes at him. It's something that plays and weighs on his mind. He says that every time he closes his eyes, all he can sort of see and hear and feel are these wild geese. Ultimately, he desecrates the part of the temple that contains this image of aesthetic beauty. It's interesting. It's almost like a kind of Mishima Yukio-esque subject here and treatment. In fact, I've likened Kawashima Yuzo before to Ichikawa Kon. And it wasn't long before this that one of Mishima's greatest, most acclaimed novels, The Temple of the Golden Pavilion, Kinkakuji, was adapted by Ichikawa into the film Enjo, or Conflagration, which similarly deals with a kind of acolyte monk who becomes so troubled with the perfect static beauty of the temple that he ends up destroying said structure, in some part as a means of assuaging his own sort of disgust at its potential sort of desecration, even if only by commodification by others. And I think that sense of a very troubled young psyche that is kind of imperiled by beauty that Mishima explores is something that also feeds into this film. So there is a really strong link, I think, there, a strong intertextual connection. This sense of lionized beauty on the one hand, and the sense of it almost as a kind of festering wound for the protagonist on the other, who wants to find his identity, wants to find his place in the world, but is assailed by this image of wild geese. He's also kind of terrorized, as it were, by a kite, a bird of prey that he often sees circling around the skies above the temple and preying on the carp that reside in the temple pond. So this sense of a kind of viciousness, a kind of predatory dimension to wild nature, if you like, is something that kind of really eats at his consciousness. And I think that metaphor of predator and prey, or that image of predator and prey, I should say, becomes a metaphor that then is developed and extrapolated into the sense of a commodification of the temple, the fact of it standing for nothing so much as a kind of site of touristic spectacle. So I think this is one of Kawashima's crowning achievements. If you've seen it, then comment below, let me know what you think. I will be reviewing other Kawashima films, both in writing and here on video reviews for my YouTube channel. So check out both my website and my my YouTube videos and vlogs. Like and subscribe, please, or don't. Thank you very much for watching if you've watched this far. If not, then up yours. Follow me on X, AdamBingham01, for lots of thoughts on Japanese cinema and other subjects. And I'll see you the next time.